This is Vladimir Kramnik. If you've come across him recently, it's probably for the wrong reasons. Public cheating accusations against other grandmasters, platform suspensions, a formal ethics complaint filed by his own sports governing body. In the chess world right now, Kramnik is, for a lot of people, simply the controversial one, the name attached to conflict, not to greatness. But before any of that, Kramnik was something almost nobody talks about anymore, one of the most respected players in the history of the game. In October 2000, he did something nobody in chess had managed in 15 years. He took on Garry Kasparov, the most dominant world champion the sport had ever produced, in a 16-game match for the title. He won 2 games, he drew 13, he lost 0. Kasparov had not lost a world championship match since becoming champion in 1985. Kramnik beat him without losing a single game in the entire series. But how did he do it? What was his peak really like? That's what we're about to find out. Kramnik's path to that match started in the most unlikely way possible. Kasparov himself put him there. In 1992, with the Soviet Union freshly collapsed, Russia assembled its national team for the chess Olympiad. Kasparov, already the reigning world champion and the captain of the team, insisted that a virtually unknown 16-year-old be given a board. That 16-year-old was Kramnik. He had been trained at the famous Botvinnik chess school, the same institution that had also shaped Karpov and Kasparov himself, meaning the eventual challenger and the reigning champion shared, quite literally, a common chess education. By the mid-1990s, Kramnik was already considered, in Kasparov's own words, the most likely heir to the throne. In January 1996, he briefly became the world's #1 ranked player. From December 1985 until March 2006, Garry Kasparov was the world's top-ranked player every single month, except those 6. Kramnik was the only person on the planet to interrupt that run, a full 4 years before he ever got the chance to play Kasparov for the title. And going into the 2000 World Championship match, Kramnik had built a streak that, by itself, would be one of the most quietly dominant runs in chess history. Across more than 100 games leading into the match, he had lost only once. 80 of those games came consecutively without a single defeat. Kasparov's preparation team expected the usual fight: sharp openings, tactical complications, the kind of double-edged positions where Kasparov's calculating power had dismantled every challenger for 15 years. Instead, Kramnik played the Berlin defense. At the time, most elite grandmasters considered the Berlin a passive, slightly dull way to meet 1e4, solid, drawish, beneath the ambitions of a world championship challenger. Kasparov had no real preparation against it. Kramnik and his team had quietly worked on it for roughly a year beforehand, turning what the chess world saw as a boring equalizing line into a precise defensive weapon that simply removed Kasparov's attacking chances before they could begin. Kasparov abandoned his main weapon, the Grunfeld defense, after Kramnik beat him with a new idea in Game 2. By Game 9, Kasparov was agreeing to short draws with the white pieces, the position of the player who is supposed to be attacking, voluntarily ending the fight early. Commentator Yasser Sirawin said afterward that he had no explanation for what happened, except that Kramnik had played the best chess of his life at the exact moment it mattered most. The final score, 8.5 to 6.5, 2 wins, 13 draws, 0 losses. Kramnik became the 14th world champion, and the Berlin defense, once dismissed as too modest for the top of the game, became one of the most respected defensive systems in all of chess, still played at the elite level today. If there is one year that captures Kramnik at his absolute peak, it is 2000 itself, and the numbers around it are worth sitting with. Across his entire career, head-to-head, Kramnik finished with a 14-13 edge over Kasparov in classical games. In a retrospective ranking, the strongest player in the world year by year through the murky title split era of 1993 to 2006. 2000 belongs to exactly one name, Kramnik, not Kasparov, who had been the undisputed best player alive for 15 straight years. The World Championship match was the headline, but it wasn't the only thing he won that year. Before facing Kasparov in London, Kramnik had already tied for first at Linares, historically one of the most stacked tournaments on the calendar, sharing the top spot with Kasparov himself. Then came London. For that result, Kramnik won the Chess Oscar for 2000, an annual award voted on by chess journalists and players to recognize the best performance of the year. The following year, in 2001, Kramnik became just the second player in history to reach a FIDE rating of 2,800, a threshold only Kasparov had ever crossed before him. At the time, it placed him in a club of exactly 2. Today, dozens of players have surpassed 2,800 at some point in their careers. But in 2001, it was a number that belonged to precisely 2 people on the planet, and Kramnik had just become one of them at 25 years old. Here is the strange part of what came next. Kramnik became world champion in 2000. Kramnik had first reached the world #1 ranking in 1996. But despite defeating Kasparov and becoming world champion in 2000, he never reclaimed the top spot immediately. Instead, he would have to wait until 2008 to return to #1, by which point he had already lost the world title. The 12-year gap between his 2 appearances at the top remains the longest in FIDE rating history. Kramnik held the most prestigious title in the sport for 7 years, while someone else, on paper, carried the highest rating almost the entire time. It tells you something specific about what Kramnik's chess actually was. Not the kind of dominance that piles up rating points through aggressive, high-volume attacking wins, but the kind that simply does not lose. A world champion who was, by reputation and by results, nearly impossible to beat in a long match, even when he wasn't mathematically the highest-rated player alive. In 2004, he proved that reputation again, defending his title against Peter Lecaux in Brissago, Switzerland. Kramnik fell behind in the match and needed a win in the final game just to survive. He got it, forcing a 7-7 draw that, under the match rules, let him keep the title outright. A challenger who had outplayed him for most of the match still walked away without the crown, because Kramnik refused to lose when it mattered most. Chess had been split since 1993, when Kasparov broke away from FIDE to form a rival organization, leaving the sport with 2 competing world champions for 13 years. In 2006, Kramnik ended that split personally. He faced Veselin Topalov, FIDE's reigning champion, in a unification match in Elista. The match finished level after 12 games, 6-6, sending it to rapid tiebreaks, where Kramnik won 2.5 to 1.5 to become the first undisputed world champion since the schism began. It is worth being precise about what that match is remembered for, separate from the result itself. The contest became infamous as Toiletgate after Topalov's team publicly suggested Kramnik was making unusually frequent bathroom visits to consult outside assistance. No concrete evidence was ever produced against either player. What the match actually proved, on the board, is that Kramnik, already the classical world champion for 6 years, could also beat the FIDE champion when the 2 titles were finally put on the line against each other. There was exactly one world champion of chess, and it was Kramnik. Kramnik's peak years weren't built on swashbuckling, crowd-pleasing attacks. They were built on the absence of weaknesses. Kasparov himself described Kramnik's style as pragmatic and tenacious, a comparison he extended to Anatoly Karpov, the legendary positional grinder of the previous generation. His endgame technique was considered, by consensus among his peers, some of the cleanest in the sport's history. He won the prestigious Dortmund tournament outright, or tied for first 10 separate times between 1995 and 2011, across more than a decade and a half against constantly shifting fields of elite opposition. The same player kept finding his way back to the top of the podium. Kramnik's reign as undisputed champion ended not in a match, but in a tournament. In 2007, FIDE organized an 8-player double round robin in Mexico City to decide the title, the first time since 1948 that a world championship had been settled this way rather than head-to-head. Anand won outright with 9 points out of 14, finishing the only undefeated player in the field. Kramnik finished in a tie for second with Boris Gelfand, 1 point behind at 8 points. Kramnik still had one card left to play, a contractual rematch. In 2008 in Bonn, he challenged Anand directly for the title he had just lost. Anand won twice in the same sharp semi-Slav line, and the match ended 6.5 to 4.5. Kramnik's last act as a former champion, trying to reclaim the throne, was a win in Game 10. Sharp, late, and not quite enough. Then, in January 2008, after he had already lost the World Championship, Kramnik returned to the world's #1 ranking for the first time since that brief stretch in 1996. It was a strange, almost ironic coda to the most dominant stretch of his career. The #1 ranking finally arrived exactly when the crown it was supposed to represent had already moved to someone else. So what does Kramnik's peak actually add up to? A defense considered too passive for elite play turned into the tool that ended a 15-year reign. A world champion who held the title for 7 years while rarely holding the world's top rating at the same time. Proof that being the hardest player to beat and being the highest rated player are not always the same thing. A unification match that brought chess back to a single champion for the first time in 13 years. Kramnik never had Kasparov's aggression or Carlsen's relentless conversion of equal positions into wins. What he had at his peak was something rarer in competitive chess, opponents who simply could not find a way through him in the moments when it counted most. That is what beat the greatest attacking player of his generation without losing a single game. That's Kramnik.